Elara tried to weep. She truly did. But the grief lodged in her throat, choked by a more primal, creeping fear. In this isolated holler, death was never a simple departure. It was a transaction. The old folks, including her own grandmother, had always spoken of it in hushed tones. The whispering, the shadows, the pact that kept the wolves at bay and the crops from failing. Silas had scoffed at it. Now he was dead, his passing marked by an unnatural, gaping silence. She was utterly alone, miles from any real town, with only the suffocating press of the trees for company. And the trees were watching. The woods, it seemed, would not allow her the simple act of mourning. They were waiting for something. When the closest neighbor, old widow Hemlock, brought a meager stew, she didn't offer condolences. She simply looked at the dark tree line and muttered, "It started. You best be ready." That night, desperate for an answer, Elara found the hidden family journal, its pages brittle with a truth more terrifying than any local superstition. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching this story from. I'd love to know how far these exciting stories are reaching. And if you've ever experienced an inexplicable situation, share it with us.
The first thing Elara noticed was the silence. It was not the ordinary peaceful quiet of the holler at dawn. It was not the gentle hush of snow blanketing the pines, nor the reverent stillness of the air just before the cicadas began their evening song. This was a different silence. It was a dense, heavy, unnatural thing. A silence that had a weight to it, pressing in on the thin walls of the cabin, smothering the very air inside. It was the silence of a stopped clock, the silence of a held breath. It was the silence of Silas. He lay on the cornhusk mattress, unmoving. His eyes were open, fixed on a damp-stained knot in the ceiling beams. A single sliver of gray morning light, thin and sharp as a knife, cut across the room from the gap in the curtains, illuminating the pale, still landscape of his face. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, no twisted agony in his features. He had simply stopped. Elara stood in the doorway, her hand still clutching the wooden ladle she'd been using to stir the meager pot of grits. The ladle clattered to the floorboards, the sound offensively loud in the vacuum. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She didn't rush to him, didn't shake his shoulders, didn't whisper his name in a frantic plea. Her mind simply refused to cross the threshold. If she didn't move, if she didn't confirm it, then perhaps the world would rewind itself. Perhaps he would blink, turn his head, and chide her for letting the cold air in. "Elara," she could almost hear him say, "Shut the door, you're lettin' the chill in." But he didn't blink, the eyes remained fixed. The silence remained unbroken. Slowly, as if wading through deep water, she forced her feet to move. Each step on the rough-hewn planks was a concession, a step closer to a truth she could not bear. The cabin was tiny, just one room, but the distance from the door to the bed felt like a mile of barren prairie. The air was cold, colder than it should have been. The fire in the hearth had died to embers, but this was a different cold. This was a cold that radiated from the stillness, a cold that settled deep in the bones. She reached his side. Her hand, chapped and raw from lye soap and splitting wood, hovered over his face. She wanted to close his eyes. It seemed the proper thing to do, the last act of kindness. But a primal fear held her back, a fear that the moment her skin touched his, the reality would become permanent, irreversible. She tried to weep. She truly did. She searched for the well of grief that a wife was supposed to feel. She found only a dry, hollow cavern filled with the dust that choked her. The grief was there, she knew, buried deep. But it was trapped, smothered by a more primal, creeping fear. In this isolated holler, nestled deep in the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, death was never a simple departure. It was a transaction. The old folks, her own grandmother included, had always spoken of it in hushed, fearful tones. They didn't talk of God or angels. They talked of the whispering. They talked of the shadows in the pines. They talked of the pact that kept the wolves from the sheep and the blight from the corn. An agreement struck generations ago with the ancient, nameless thing that lived in the dark spaces between the trees. Silas had scoffed at it. He was a man of the New World, a man who believed in iron plows and repeating rifles. He had called it hill folk nonsense, the superstitions of the uneducated. He had chopped down the old, gnarled oak at the edge of their property. The one her grandmother had always warned was a marker. "It's just a tree, Elara," he'd said, his axe biting deep, "and I need the wood." Now he was dead. His passing was marked by that unnatural, gaping silence. He had died in the one way the mountain folk feared most. Not from a fall, or a fever, or a snakebite, but quietly in his sleep, as if his soul had been politely and irreversibly plucked. Elara backed away from the bed. Her shoulder blades hit the rough, cold wood of the cabin wall. She was utterly alone, miles from any real town, miles from the law, miles from anything that wasn't trees and rock and shadow. The suffocating press of the pines felt like a physical weight against the cabin. And the trees, she now realized, were watching. The woods, it seemed, would not allow her the simple act of mourning. They were waiting for something, waiting for her. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of sound. It was an expectation. She tried to weep. She truly did. She searched for the well of grief that a wife was supposed to feel. She found only a dry, hollow cavern filled with the dust that choked her. The grief was there, she knew, buried deep. But it was trapped, smothered by a more primal, creeping fear. In this isolated holler, nestled deep in the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, death was never a simple departure. It was a transaction. The old folks, her own grandmother included, had always spoken of it in hushed, fearful tones. They didn't talk of God or angels. They talked of the whispering. They talked of the shadows in the pines. They talked of the pact that kept the wolves from the sheep and the blight from the corn. An agreement struck generations ago with the ancient, nameless thing that lived in the dark spaces between the trees. Silas had scoffed at it. He was a man of the New World, a man who believed in iron plows and repeating rifles. He had called it hill folk nonsense, the superstitions of the uneducated. He had chopped down the old, gnarled oak at the edge of their property. The one her grandmother had always warned was a marker. "It's just a tree, Elara," he'd said, his axe biting deep, "and I need the wood." Now he was dead. His passing was marked by that unnatural, gaping silence. He had died in the one way the mountain folk feared most. Not from a fall, or a fever, or a snakebite, but quietly in his sleep, as if his soul had been politely and irreversibly plucked. Elara backed away from the bed. Her shoulder blades hit the rough, cold wood of the cabin wall. She was utterly alone, miles from any real town, miles from the law, miles from anything that wasn't trees and rock and shadow. The suffocating press of the pines felt like a physical weight against the cabin. And the trees, she now realized, were watching. The woods, it seemed, would not allow her the simple act of mourning. They were waiting for something, waiting for her. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of sound. It was an expectation. It took 2 days to bury him. 2 days for the news to travel, carried by smoke signal or perhaps just by the wind, down to the few other souls who scratched a living from the surrounding ridges. They came. 3 men from the Downer place, sullen and silent, their faces hidden by beard and grime. They didn't ask what happened. They knew better. They simply brought their shovels. They chose a spot on the hill, beneath a stand of birch trees that Silas had always intended to clear. Elara watched from the cabin window, a pale ghost behind the warped glass. She couldn't bring herself to go out there. She couldn't watch them break the rocky soil for him. Instead, she scrubbed the floorboards. She scrubbed them until her knuckles were raw and the scent of lye burned her nostrils. She scrubbed the spot where the ladle had fallen. She scrubbed as if she could erase the silence itself. When they were finished, the men just left. They didn't knock on her door to offer condolences. They didn't accept the water she'd offered. They just collected their tools, their shoulders hunched against a wind that hadn't started yet, and disappeared back into the trees. Their fear was a tangible thing, a rank smell that lingered in the air. That evening, as a bruised purple twilight settled over the holler, a new figure emerged from the trees. It was Widow Hemlock. She was an old woman, older than the trees, some said. She lived alone on the highest ridge, a place where even the ravens seemed to thin. She was the holler's midwife, its herbalist, and its unspoken fear. She knew the old ways. She was the one who brought Elara's grandmother's whispered warnings to life. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to bolt the door, but the old woman was already on the porch, a dark, bundled shape against the dying light. Elara opened the door a crack. Widow Hemlock's face was a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes as dark and deep as a well. She held out a small wooden bowl. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of roots and dark meat. "You ain't eaten," the old woman stated. It wasn't a question. Her voice was a dry rustle, like corn husks skittering across a floor. "No," Elara whispered. The widow didn't offer condolences. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss." Her gaze swept past Elara, into the dark cabin, toward the empty bed. Then she looked back at Elara, a strange, almost clinical pity in her eyes. "He was a fool," the widow said, not unkindly. "He was loud, he didn't listen." Elara flinched, a flash of defensiveness rising. "He was a good man." "Goodness ain't got no currency up here," the widow countered. "This ain't a place for good. It's a place for quiet, a place for respectful." He chopped the marker tree. He stopped Levin, the salt lick. He stopped paying the tithe. Elara's blood ran cold. The tithe? The woods demand their due. The widow looked past her, not at the cabin, but at the dark, looming tree line. They are patient, but they are not forgetful. They'll let a debt run for a time, but they always collect. She pushed the bowl into Elara's trembling hands. The stew was thick and dark. "This ain't over, girl." What do you mean?" Elara stammered, the warmth of the bowl a strange contrast to the ice in her veins. Widow Hemlock's eyes locked onto hers. The pity was gone, replaced by a grim certainty. "It started," she muttered. "You best be ready." The old woman turned, a black shawl pulled tight, and descended the porch steps. She didn't walk so much as glide, and in moments the twilight swallowed her whole. Elara was left standing in the doorway, the cryptic warning hanging in the air like frost. It started. She closed the door, bolting it. The sound of the heavy wooden bar sliding into place offered no comfort. It felt futile, like trying to stop the fog with a fence. She forced down a few spoonfuls of the stew. It was gamey and bitter, but it was warm. It was life. As she ate, her eyes scanned the small, familiar room, now made alien by dread. Everything looked the same. Silas's whittling knife on the mantel, his boots by the door, but it was all wrong. A shadow had been cast over it, a shadow that had been there all along, one she had simply refused to see. Her gaze fell on the hearth. Silas had been proud of that hearth. He'd rebuilt it stone by stone. But one stone, near the bottom, had always been loose. He'd cursed it, always meaning to fix it with a bit of mortar. "You best be ready." What did she mean? Ready for what? A sudden, irrational compulsion seized her. She put the bowl down. She knelt by the hearth, the stones cold against her knees. Her fingers, shaking, found the loose stone. She pulled. It scraped, gritty, and came free. Behind it was a small dark hollow, and in the hollow, wrapped in oilcloth, was a book. It was not a Bible. It was a small, leather-bound ledger, its cover stiff and cracked with age. She pulled it out. The oilcloth fell away, brittle. It smelled of earth and smoke and something else. Something like dried herbs and fear. She opened it. The first page was written in a cramped, faded brown script. It was not her grandmother's hand. It was her great-grandmother's. The first entry was dated 1834, the year the family had first settled this god-forsaken holler. "We have made the bargain," it read. "The land is ours, but the woods will have their price. We are to be quiet, we are to be respectful, and we are to pay the tithe. A portion for the shadow, a life for the land." Elara's breath hitched. She flipped through the pages. They were filled with cryptic entries. Notes of first frost and blood moon. Lists of items, a bowl of milk, a lock of hair, a drop of blood. And then, more disturbing, the woods took the lame calf. The woods took the stillborn. Then she found the last entry, written in her own grandmother's shaky hand, dated just a few weeks before she died. "He brings the loud woman, the one who doesn't see. She will be the end. The boy scoffs. He cuts the tree. The pact is broken. The debt is called." A cold sweat broke out on Elara's neck. The loud woman. That was her. The city-bred girl Silas had brought back, the one who complained about the dirt and the silence. "The debt is called." A sharp, violent crack echoed from outside, like a massive tree branch snapping. Elara screamed, dropping the book. She scrambled back, pressing herself against the wall. The cabin was silent again, but the silence had changed. The expectation was gone. Now there was only presence. The woods were no longer waiting. They were here. The days that followed were a blur of gritty survival and creeping dread. Grief remained a distant luxury, a thing for a world that wasn't trying to actively consume her. Her new routine was dictated not by the sun, but by fear. She woke not to the light, but to the sound. The first morning after finding the diary, it was a skittering on the roof. Not the light, frantic claws of a squirrel, but a heavy, deliberate drag, like a burlap sack full of stones being pulled across the shingles. She lay paralyzed on her mattress, clutching the quilt to her chin, until the gray light of dawn finally, reluctantly, seeped through the window. When she gathered the courage to look, there was nothing. Nothing but a single, large black feather, thicker than any raven's, slick with a substance that wasn't morning dew, lying on her porch steps. She left it. She was afraid to touch it. Her world shrank to the four walls of the cabin and the small, cleared patch of dirt around it. The woods, once a place of foraging and quiet walks, were now a solid wall of malevolence. She had to survive. Silas was gone, and winter was coming. The tasks were mundane, but the context was terrifying. Chopping wood became an ordeal of paranoia. Every swing of the axe was punctuated by a frantic scan of the tree line. Was that shadow there a moment ago? Did that branch just move against the wind? She would find herself holding her breath, listening, and the woods would listen back. A profound, watchful silence would fall. The birds would stop singing. The insects would go still. The entire holler, it seemed, was waiting for her to turn her back. She would gather an armful of wood and sprint back to the cabin, bolting the door behind her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the sudden, oppressive silence. She checked the few traps Silas had set. The first one was empty, the trigger mechanism snapped but no catch. The second held the mangled remains of a rabbit, but it wasn't a fox or a wolf that had gotten to it. The creature had been torn apart, but not eaten. It was a display, a warning. We can take what we want. The nights were the worst. The silence that had followed Silas's death was gone, replaced by a symphony of the unsettling. The whispers started on the third night. They weren't words, not human words. It was a sound like dry leaves blowing across a stone floor, a sibilant shh that seemed to come from all directions at once. It would rise and fall with the wind, sometimes sounding like a cruel imitation of a lullaby, sometimes like 1,000 indrawn breaths. Elara would sit in the rocking chair, Silas's old hunting rifle heavy across her lap. She kept the lantern burning low, but the shadows it cast seemed to leap and twist with a life of their own. The fire in the hearth would spit strange colors, a flash of green, a pop of sickly blue, and the smoke would refuse to draw, hanging in the air like a shroud. She read the diary, over and over. She read it until her eyes burned and the cramped script swam before her. She was desperate for an answer, a solution, a how-to guide for dealing with a malevolent, ancient entity. But the diary offered no solutions. It was only a ledger of fear. August 1842. The woods took the cow, left the bell, it rings in the night. November 1850. Mary's boy was born wrong. A mercy, the widow Hemlock said. She took him to the woods. She came back alone. July 1871. The drought is bad. The tithe was not enough. The creek runs black. We must add the red. Elara's stomach turned. The red. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what that meant. She was living in a house built on a foundation of terrible bargains. Her ancestors had traded blood for survival. And Silas, in his arrogant modernity, had broken the contract. He had stopped the small rituals, the bowl of cream left on the porch, the salt block at the edge of the woods, the silent nod of respect her grandmother had insisted upon. He hadn't believed, and now the lenders had come to collect, and they had taken him as collateral. But Widow Hemlock's words haunted her. It's started. His death wasn't the end of the debt. It was just the first payment. One night, a terrible storm rolled in. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. It was a high, thin sound, like a woman's shriek, that seemed to come from inside her own skull. Rain lashed the cabin, and the roof, the one that had held the heavy, dragging sound, began to leak. Not just water. A thick, dark, resinous sap, smelling of pine and something coppery, like old blood, began to drip near the hearth. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop hit the floor with a sizzling sound. Elara pushed past her fear into a realm of frantic, desperate action, grabbed the axe from by the door. She unbolted the door and threw it open, screaming into the storm. "Leave me alone!" The wind stopped, instantly. The rain, the screaming, the dripping, it all ceased. The silence of the holler fell, absolute and profound. But this time, it was worse. It was not the silence of expectation. It was the silence of amusement, as if a predator was quietly, patiently, watching its prey exhaust itself. Elara stood in the doorway, the axe heavy in her hands, her nightgown soaked, her hair plastered to her face. She was panting, her breath pluming in the sudden frigid air. The woods were still, not a leaf twitched. And then, from the darkness, a single, large, black feather drifted down from the sky, untouched by any breeze, and landed softly on the porch step at her feet, right next to the first one. She slowly, numbly, bolted the door. She sank to the floor, her back against the wood, the axe held tight to her chest. She did not sleep. She just watched the shadows in the cabin, shadows that were no longer just an absence of light, and waited for the dawn. The new routine had been established. She was the trapped rabbit, and the woods were in no hurry. The conflict was no longer just between Elara and the woods. It was now between Elara and the past, and, increasingly, between Elara and the living. The diary became her obsession. It was her only weapon, her only map, and she feared, her only potential executioner. She pored over the pages, her mind racing, trying to find a pattern, a loophole, a way out. The tithe was the key. Silas had stopped paying it. But what was it? The early entries were simple: a bowl of cream, a portion of the harvest, a twist of tobacco. These, Elara surmised, were the interest payments. Small tokens of respect, but as the generations passed, the entries grew darker. The, quote, payments became more significant, coinciding with times of hardship. 1855. The fever came. We gave the woods the goat. The fever passed. John Downer's family gave nothing. Their cabin is empty now. A chill ran down Elara's spine. The Downer place. The men who had buried Silas. Their ancestors had paid a terrible price for their skepticism. She realized with dawning horror that the pact was not a metaphor. It was a literal binding contract. The woods, the entity, provided protection. It kept the worst of the mountain's hardships at bay. It blunted the fevers, turned the wolves, kept the winter storms from being too devastating. In return, it wanted to be acknowledged. It wanted to be fed. And when the small payment stopped, it took a larger one. Silas had broken the pact. He had been loud, he had been disrespectful. He had taken the tree without giving. And so the entity had collected the outstanding debt. It had taken him. But Widow Hemlock's words, it started, echoed in her mind. His death hadn't wiped the slate clean. It had only reset the terms. The pact was broken, and the protection it offered was gone. This realization coincided with a new and more immediate threat: her neighbors. A week after the storm, she made the desperate trek to the nearest ridge, to the Downers' settlement, hoping to trade for some flour and salt. The clearing, which had always been quiet, was now silent, in a new way, hostile. John Downer, the great-grandson of the man from the diary, was splitting wood. When he saw her, his axe slowed, but did not stop. Thud, 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 a heavy, judgmental rhythm. "Mr. Downer," she called, her voice sounding thin. He stopped. He turned. His eyes, small and dark under a heavy brow, held no welcome. "Mrs. Miller." I came to see if I could trade for some flour," she said, holding up a small pouch of Silas's tobacco. His wife appeared in the doorway of their cabin, a gaunt woman with fear in her eyes. She quickly pulled a small child behind her skirts, as if Elara herself was the plague. "We got no flour to spare," Downer said flatly. His eyes flickered to the pouch in her hand. "And we don't want his leavens." I don't understand," Elara faltered. "Don't you?" Downer took a step closer, his knuckles white on the axe handle. "My boy's got the cough. My wife's chickens, all dead. Every last one. Found 'em this morning. Torn up. Just like your rabbit." Elara's breath caught. "The woods." "The woods were quiet," he snapped, his voice a low growl. "For 50 years they were quiet. We paid our respects. We kept the pact. Then he comes." He spat on the ground. "Your man, loud, arrogant, choppin' the marker tree." "He didn't know," Elara whispered, a plea. "He didn't want to know." Downer's wife shrieked from the doorway. "He called us heathens, and now he's gone, and the debt's fallen on all of us." "The woods are angry, girl. The protection is gone. And it's your fault." "Mine?" Elara was stunned. "You're his," Downer said, his meaning clear as a snakebite. "You're the loud woman, the one from the diary. You're the one who let him break the pact. And now you're the one who's living in the house that's got the debt." He took another step. "The woods are hungry, and they're taken from us because you ain't paying." Elara backed away, her hands raised. What do you want me to do?" Downer's face was grim. "That's for you to figure, or for the widow to figure for you. But you best fix it. You best make the payment, or we will." The threat hung in the air, unambiguous. We will. It wasn't just the entity in the woods she had to fear. It was the desperate, superstitious, terrified people who lived there with her. They didn't see her as a widow. They saw her as a liability, a sickness. She ran. She fled back to her cabin, the tobacco pouch spilling, forgotten, on the path. She was trapped. The woods wanted a payment. The neighbors demanded a payment. She barricaded the door and went back to the diary, her search now frantic, desperate. She was no longer looking for an explanation. She was looking for the price. What was the ultimate tithe? What did they mean, add the red? She found it, on a page near the end, a page stuck to the back cover, stained with something dark. 1881. The blight is on all. The woods demand the full price. The old pact must be renewed. The widow comes. It is not a death that is asked. It is a sacrifice, a life for the land. One of us, for all of us. The woods must have a vow. It must have a keeper. Elara dropped the book. A keeper, not a death, a life given over to the woods, a life in service. A cold, horrifying realization dawned. They didn't want to kill her. The woods and her neighbors didn't want her blood. They wanted her to become the new widow Hemlock. They wanted her to become the next keeper of the pact. A lonely, isolated existence, bound to this holler, to these woods, forever. A living sacrifice. A knock echoed on the door. It wasn't a knock. It was a thump, heavy, patient. She looked at the door, her heart stopping. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't Downer. It wasn't the widow. It was the heavy, dragging sound from the roof. But it was at her door. The main conflict was no longer a matter of survival. It was a matter of salvation. And the price was her soul. Thump, thump, thump. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, up Elara's legs, and into her very bones. It was not a sound of violence. It was a sound of summons. A heavy, patient, undeniable call. Outside, the woods had gone utterly silent. No wind, no whispers, just the heavy, oppressive weight of the entity's full attention. A keeper, the diary had said. A life for the land. Elara looked at the door. She looked at the axe. She looked at the rifle. All useless. How do you shoot a shadow? How do you chop a dead? The thumping stopped. A new sound began. A low, guttural groan. It was the sound of the cabin itself. The wood of the walls, the beams of the roof. They were straining, as if an immense, invisible weight was pressing down, trying to crush the small space, to squeeze her out. The pressure in her ears was immense. The lantern flame flickered, burned blue and died, plunging the room into near-total darkness lit only by the dying red embers in the hearth. And in that red-tinged darkness, she heard a new voice, Widow Hemlock's. "It's time, girl." The old woman's voice was sharp, cutting through the pressure from outside the door. "Open the door! Make the vow! It's the only way! It's the price!" Elara scrambled to the window. In the moonlight, she could see them. Not just the widow. John Downer was there. And his wife. And the other Downer men. They weren't holding torches and pitchforks. They were holding shovels and hoes. They weren't a lynch mob. They were a congregation. They had come to witness her sacrifice, to make sure she paid the debt that would save them. "It wants its keeper," Downer roared, his voice thick with fear. "Pay the price, or we'll make you." The pressure on the cabin intensified. A hairline crack appeared in the window glass. The wood groaned in agony. Elara was trapped. A sacrifice to the woods, or a sacrifice to the mob. It is not a death that is asked. The diary's words echoed in her head. It is a vow. She looked at the diary, lying on the floor, the source of her terror, the ledger of her family's sin, the contract. A strange, cold clarity washed over her. A different kind of anger, not the hot, frantic anger of before, but a cold, deep, quiet rage. The rage of the cornered animal. They wanted to keep her. They wanted her to give her life to this thing, to become another link in a chain of fear, to spend the rest of her days as a lonely, terrified old woman, placating a shadow bound to this patch of dirt. No, Silas had been a fool. Her ancestors had been cowards, and her neighbors were slaves. She would be none of those things. "Open the door!" the widow shrieked as a new, louder crack echoed from the roof. "All right," Elara whispered to the shadows in the room. Her voice was surprisingly steady. She did not go to the door. She knelt by the hearth. With a steady hand, she gathered the last few embers onto the stone floor. She picked up the diary. The leather cover felt cold, almost slick. "What's she doing?" she heard Downer's wife hiss. Elara opened the book to the first page. "We have made the bargain." "No more," Elara said. She laid the book on the embers. At first, nothing happened. The embers were too cold. "Do it, girl, or we're comin' in!" Downer yelled, and the cabin door rattled as a shoulder hit it. "Come on," Elara whispered at the book, her voice a desperate prayer, not to God, but to the fire. She blew on the embers. A tiny flame licked up. The moment the flame touched the brittle, ink-filled page, a shriek tore through the night. It was not Elara. It was not the widow. It was the woods. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. The pressure on the cabin vanished, replaced by a violent, hurricane-force wind that seemed to come from all directions at once. The trees bent, their branches clawing at the sky. The people outside screamed. Elara ignored them. She held the book down as the pages began to catch, one by one. The woods took the cow. The page blackened and curled. "Mary's boy, born wrong." The flame consumed the words. "Add the red." The ink bubbled and vanished into smoke. With every page that burned, the wind outside grew more frantic. The entity was in pain. It was not a god, it was a parasite, and she had just set fire to its contract, its title deed. The cabin door burst open. John Downer stood there, his face pale with terror and disbelief. Behind him, the widow Hemlock looked on, her face a mask of horror. "What have you done?" she breathed. The last page, the one with the final vow, caught fire. A life for the land, a keeper. "The debt is paid," Elara said, her voice ringing with a power she didn't know she possessed. She looked not at Downer, but past him, at the writhing, screaming woods. "The bargain is broken," she yelled into the storm. "We are not your keepers. We are not your tithe. We are done." She slammed her hand down on the burning book, extinguishing the last of the flames, grinding the ashes into the stone. And as the last page turned to dust, the wind stopped. Not gradually, it stopped, instantly, as if a switch had been thrown. The silence that fell was profound. But it was different. It was not the silence of expectation. It was not the silence of amusement. It was the silence of absence. The woods were just woods. The trees were just trees. The pressure, the presence that had defined her entire life in this holler, was gone. John Downer stared at her, his axe forgotten in his hand. The widow Hemlock was looking at the woods, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a new, unfamiliar emotion, not fear, awe. Elara stood up, her hand black with ash. She was shaking, she was exhausted, but for the first time since she'd come to this mountain, she was not afraid. She had been left alone in the cabin. The woods had refused to let her grieve. So she had destroyed the woods. The dawn came, gray and quiet. Elara sat on her porch steps, in the rocking chair she had dragged from inside. She was wrapped in a quilt, holding a tin cup of chicory coffee, scalding hot. The air was cold, sharp, and blessedly empty. The woods were just woods. The bird song that morning was tentative at first, then bolder. A pair of cardinals, bright red against the green-gray pines, flitted from branch to branch. A squirrel chattered, angry and impatient, from a nearby oak. They were just sounds. They were not messages. They were not threats. She looked at the spot on the ground where the black feathers had been. They were gone, not taken, just gone, blown away by a wind that was, for the first time, just wind. The silence was real now, and in it, Elara finally found the space to grieve. She wept. She wept for Silas, for his foolishness, for his stubborn pride, for the way he would hum when he was whittling. She wept for the life they were supposed to have, the children they were supposed to raise. She wept for her grandmother and her great-grandmother. She wept for the generations of women who had lived and died as prisoners of a fear they had mistaken for faith. Women who had traded their children, their sanity, and their lives to a shadow, all for the promise of a little less hardship. She wept for the hollow, empty feeling inside her. The fear was gone, but so was everything else. She was truly, profoundly alone. Around noon, a shadow fell across the porch. Elara didn't flinch, she just looked up. It was Widow Hemlock. The old woman stood at the bottom of the steps, her hands clasped. She looked smaller, older. Just an old woman, no longer an oracle. The cough is gone, the widow said, her voice hesitant. John Downer's boy. He woke up clear as a bell. The chickens are, well, they're still dead, but the rest are fine. Elara just nodded, sipping her coffee. What was it? The old woman asked, a genuine, fearful curiosity in her eyes. What was that thing? Elara looked at the ashes near her hearth. It was a parasite, she said, the word tasting strange and foreign. It fed on fear, and our family, we fed it for a century. We called it a pact, but it was just a cage. And now? The widow asked. Elara looked out at the holler. The mountains seemed smaller, less imposing. Just rock and dirt. And now, we're free, Elara said, and we're on our own. The widow looked at the woods, then back at Elara. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a look of profound, weary respect. The winters will be harder now, she said. The fevers will be real. The wolves, they'll be wolves. Yes, Elara said, they will. The old woman nodded, a slow, final gesture. I brought you some eggs. She placed a small basket on the steps and turned, walking away. She did not glide. She just walked, an old woman with aching bones, back up the ridge. Elara was left alone, but the meaning of the word had changed. She was not left alone, as in abandoned. She was alone, by choice, in a world that was suddenly, terrifyingly, beautifully real. She finished her coffee. She stood up. She had wood to chop. She had traps to set. The winter would be hard, but it would be her winter. The silence was no longer a weight. It was a canvas, and she was, at last, ready to begin. The whispers of the old world are many, but the strength to silence them is found in the most unexpected hearts. The mountains hold their secrets, but so do the people who dare to live in their shadow. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more whispers from our country's past, please subscribe to our channel, Old World Whispers. We have many more stories to tell and many more silences to break.